drive-by striping, or whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with the spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot of the thing. This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. I mean, the poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
Herbert Baumeister's friends describe him as a man who had nervous tendencies, a fairly explosive temper, and a strange sense of humor.
He was just a major prankster, and with that in mind, he just, anything for a laugh he would do, but on the other side, he was still pretty compassionate too. He didn't want to take him to too far extremes to hurt anybody.
I was shocked. I was mortally shocked because in knowing her for the past 15, 16 years, I found him, as a spontaneous, do any type of thing person within, certain reasons.
It was 1994, and Julie Baumeister was convinced her husband of 23 years was acting off. Not that their marriage could have been described as average or Herb normal. Herb's family was well aware of Herb's antisocial behavior since the time he was a child. He was often told off for telling crude jokes and playing with the corpses of animals. Once he even urinated atop a teacher's desk. In another incident, young Herb even brought in a dead bird and hid it in another teacher's desk. He was never popular at school, and indeed was quite a lonely child, since most kids his age found him to be too weird for them. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia as a teenager, but he was never treated for this because his parents refused to accept the prognosis. This did little to help Herb, and he struggled to make friends even after graduation. When it came to their relationship, at first Julie and Herb appeared happy, but only 6 months into the marriage, Herb was committed to a mental institution by his father, reportedly with a case of depression. The couple stayed together after Herb's release, but whatever happened between them did not seem to have been worked out. Julie Baumeister admits the couple had only slept together 6 times in over 2 decades of marriage, with the sole intention, it seemed, to conceive their 3 children. So what was going on inside Herb's head in 1994? From the outside, Herb appeared to have everything going for him. He and his family lived in an 18-acre estate in Westfield, Indiana worth $1 million, which they called Fox Hollow Farm. Herb also owned a thrift store, Save-A-Lot, that allowed him and his family to live comfortably. But as is most often the case, appearances are misleading. Despite having a good work ethic, Herb had problems staying in college and dropped out twice. A few years into his marriage, Herb was fired from the job that his father had gotten him, and struggled to secure another. In the end, it was his wife who went out to support the family, and Herb stayed at home to look after their kids. It was clear Herb was living a double life that he kept hidden from his wife. He was a regular at several gay bars around Indianapolis, approximately 40 minutes drive away from his house. Little is known about what happened behind closed doors of the Fox Hollow Farm, but it's also suspected that some form of domestic abuse was going on. On the year of 1994, one of Herb's sons brought his mother a human skull. She immediately went out to investigate the pile of bones that had been buried on the family's estate. And though this discovery may shock a lot of people, and the most obvious explanation would be to call the police, Julie didn't. Instead, she confronted her husband, who told her these bones were from his father's old medical skeleton somewhere out in the back. At this, Julie didn't press further. Instead, for the next couple of years, she and her children tried to stay away from the house as much as they possibly could, while Herb focused on the business. But what business was this that kept Herb so preoccupied? While Julie's marriage was slowly crumbling before her, the police were investigating a series of disappearances of gay men around the Indianapolis area. The killer became known as the I70 Stangler, for the serial killer's MO involved strangling his victims and leaving their lifeless naked or semi-naked bodies along the Interstate 70 in Indiana. In 1992, a man who identified himself as Tony Harris came forward to police with a shocking tale. He'd been approached by a man called Brian Smart at a local gay bar. Smart had invited Harris back to his home, where the former had tried to murder him in a play of erotic asphyxiation. Throughout the evening, Smart had even talked about murdering people and had been doing it for years, which made him confident the police would never catch him. This was also in the 80s and 90s, a time when men who visited gay bars were often ignored by the police force and often fell victim to a series of victim blaming. Usually something along the lines of that they had asked for it or they knew their lifestyle was a high risk. After his escape, Harris was convinced Smart was responsible for the disappearance of his friend Roger Goodlett. It sounded like a great lead, but it soon turned out that their Brian Smart had used a fake name, and Harris had little recollection of the whereabouts of the house Smart had taken him to. The police had to wait for 3 years before Harris would see Brian Smart again and take down his license plate. This license plate would lead police to Herb Baumeister. In 1995, after a rocky few years, Julie was doing her best to patch up her marriage, at least for her children. Herb was not an easy man to live with, and Julie thought she had seen the worst of his behavior during the dark days of the marriage when he had begun drinking. What she didn't expect was the police to turn up on her doorstep pointing at her husband as a suspected serial killer. He of course denied the accusations but refused to allow police to investigate the property without a search warrant. Julie feared the worst, but most of all she was afraid for her own life and her children's. Her husband had a volatile side that was becoming increasingly more aggressive throughout the years. Julie denied the police their request in the presence of Herb, but as soon as Herb left for a business trip, she called police. She, just as they were, was eager to get to the bottom of it. What they found would shake even the toughest of skin. Once the police arrived, Julie immediately led them to the garage where her son had found the skull. As police began to dig, more was to be uncovered. The remains of 11 bodies, suspected to be parts of the missing young men, were found scattered around the perimeter of the Fox Hollow farm, their necks showing signs of strangulation. The victims included Alan Wayne Brossard, 28, Jeff Allen Jones, 31, Johnny Bayer, 20, Manuel Resendez, 31, Michael Kern, 46, Roger A. Goodlett, 33, Richard D. Hamilton, 20, Stephen Hale, 26, and 3 yet-to-be-identified men. Noting down the similarities between these victims and that of the I70 Stangler, the police soon made the connection that the 2 killers were indeed the same person. An arrest warrant was immediately issued for Herb, but by the time police would come across him, it would be too late. Upon hearing the news of his impending arrest, Herb fled to Ontario, to a place called Pinery Provincial Park on Lake Huron. Herb shot himself before justice for his victims could be served. Besides his body, authorities found a 3-page suicide note that pointed the finger to his failing marriage and stress of his business, as well as the debt that he had collected over the years, as the straws for breaking the camel's back. There had been no mention of his victims up in Indiana, or the fact that he was about to be publicly outed for his crimes. It is still not fully known the total period Herb was active, nor the exact victim count. Together with the bodies found on his estate, the police added another 9 victims, all discovered around the woodland, numbering to at least 20 victims for Herb. Julie was questioned by authorities to confirm she had not been aware or involved in her husband's crimes. She was soon released and moved away from Fox Hollow Farm to start a new life. Even to this day, though, the new owners of the Fox Hollow Farm are convinced that the estate is haunted by the ghosts of the victims. They attest to having seen spirits taking the form of dismembered bodies floating around certain rooms of their home. I can't help but wonder if things might have been different had Herb's family supported the prognosis of schizophrenia and got him help. It begs the question, what drives a man to commit such horror, to prey on the vulnerable and make the lives of his family a terrifying day-by-day existence? Unfortunately, these answers have long been buried with the man himself.